The last thing Anna Strand bought with her final silver was a heel of rye bread so stale it could split a lip. She should have turned south the moment the market gates of Járnvik swallowed her whole. She should have kept her head down, her shawl drawn to her brows, and her steps pointed toward the broken mill house, 2 leagues past the river bend where she had slept alone for 3 months. She should have wanted nothing. Wanting was for women whose husbands still drew breath. The wind off the fjord came in sideways that evening, cold and mineral and faintly sweet in a way that made her stomach clench. She recognized the scent. Every wolf born above the tree line knew it. Ulfbandad. The Ashveld traders called it purified silver. The free packs of the north called it by its older name, the slow death, and taught their children to run from it the way they taught them to run from fire. She pressed her free hand flat to the low curve of her belly. The pup inside her stilled, then shifted, restless, aware. Even unborn, it recognized poison in the air. "Steady," she told it silently. "I know." She had been talking to it that way since the night Alex had not come home. Since the night she had stood in the door of their longhouse and watched the torchlight of the raiding party diminish into nothing on the road east, and understood, by some bone-deep calculus she could not name, that she would never see her mate again. She was still talking to the pup. She intended to keep doing so until it could answer. She meant to buy the bread and leave. She meant to see nothing, need nothing, ask nothing of this city or any soul inside it. Then she heard the sound. It came from the high end of the market, past the rows of oiled furs and the vendors of Ulfbane wire and the perfumers selling attar, mixed with something sharper underneath, a thin, reedy whimper. The sort of sound a creature makes when it has cried itself past the ability to cry, when all that remains is the shape of grief, the habit of it, the hollow going through of motions the body has forgotten how to stop. Her wolf? What small wolf she had, quarter blood and shy, and so carefully hidden for years that even Alex had not known the full measure of it, went very still in her chest. Then it lurched forward like a hound that has caught a scent. She turned before she had decided to. Through the press of fur-cloaked bodies and pike staves and the acrid smoke of the torches, she found the raised platform at the square's center. Black stone. Iron rings. 2 guards in the gray-green livery of the Ashveld crown, flanking a third man whose voice was already climbing above the crowd's noise. And on the platform, on his knees, was the man. She had heard the songs about Halvard of the Drovek line. Everyone above the ironwood had. Songs about a king so broad across the shoulders that doorframes were made wider in his hall, whose gray eyes could read the wind 2 days before the storm arrived, who had ended a border war with 14 words, spoken quietly in his enemy's ear. The songs had made him large in the way that songs always made their subjects large, mythic, gilded, implausible. The man on the platform was not a song. He was younger than she had imagined, perhaps 35. His dark hair was matted at the temples. A scar she had not heard sung about cut from the hinge of his jaw, down into the open collar of a shirt that had seen better years, and his hands bound at the wrists by Ulfbane cuffs, linked with a chain the length of a forearm, were held in front of him with a stillness that was not calm but control, the kind of stillness that costs. An iron yoke sat across his shoulders, too narrow for the width of them. They had designed it to humiliate, and it had not worked. He was not bowed. His head was up. His eyes, and this was the thing that stopped her breath. His eyes were the color of a winter river where the current runs too fast to freeze, gray going to silver at the rims. And they were fixed on nothing. Not the crowd, not the auctioneer, not the torches. He stared past the world with the quiet of a man who has decided that what surrounds him is not worth the dignity of his attention. Around his throat, flushed to the skin, sat a collar of pale hammered wolfbane, 2 fingers wide. The runes etched into it were so fine they would have passed for decoration to anyone who did not know what wolfbane runes did when properly cast. She knew. They locked the wolf inside the man, turned every breath to iron, made the animal lie down and go quiet and stay quiet until the metal chose to let it breathe. The auctioneer was already warming to his patter. Last of the Járnvik line, dethroned Alpha King of the Northern Range, collar broken, fully warranted docile under wolfbane seal, offered tonight with 1 extra lot, a runt companion included for the buyer's amusement. And there was the pup. Anna had not seen it at first because it was tucked against the king's chest, half hidden in the crook of one bound arm, small enough to seem impossible, no bigger than a loaf of bread, silver-gray furred, nose pressed to the hollow where the wolfbane collar met skin, finding the one warm place the metal had not stolen. Its eyes were squeezed shut. It was the one making the sound. The bound king turned his head, very slowly, and brushed his cheek across the top of the cub's skull. Just that. Just the barest touch of skin to fur. 3 things landed in Anna's chest at once, and struck with the precision of thrown knives. The cub had locked into its wolf shape from terror, and could not shift back. The moment a buyer separated it from the man holding it, the Exiled guards would do what Exiled guards always did with useless animals. And there was no buyer in this square who would want both, a deposed king and a traumatized wolf child who couldn't speak. She did not remember walking forward. She remembered the crowd parting in front of her belly, the way crowds always parted for heavily pregnant women in the north, with a kind of grudging, superstitious respect. She remembered the cold of the platform stone coming up through the worn soles of her boots. She remembered the auctioneer looking down at her with the particular contempt that men of his station reserve for women who smell of dried herbs and river mud, and she remembered the long pale finger he raised to dismiss her. The bidding is restricted to chartered houses, little mother. Step down before someone steps on you. Anna's pulse was doing something peculiar. It was not racing. It was settling. The way water settles when it finds the lowest point in the basin and decides to stay. She looked past the auctioneer. She looked at the kneeling man. He raised his eyes from the cub. Slowly. Under the weight of the collar, everything was slow. He met her gaze, and he did not plead. He did not hope. He only looked at her, exhausted and still. And somewhere under Anna's ribs, in the small dark place where her wolf lived, its quiet life, something rang like a plucked wire 2 rooms away. Then, uncertain, impossible. Half-blood widows carrying dead men's children did not feel threads. And yet, the pup in her belly pressed one small foot against her navel, and it was not restless this time. It was listening. I bid, Anna said. Her voice came out level. She was as surprised as anyone. The auctioneer laughed, a polished, dismissive sound. With what, little mother? Your blessings? Your weeds? She reached into the inner pocket of her cloak. The thing she drew out was small and old and worn smooth from years against her body. A disc of dark ash wood the size of a child's palm, banded in tarnished silver, carved on one face with the running wolf mark of the Strand line. On its reverse in letters so small they caught the torchlight only when tilted, paid in full. By widow's right. Sacred and unbarterable. It was Alex's bride price. Though his line had paid for her hand, formally and in full, witnessed by elders and registered in the pack's memory book. The only thing the Greywater elders had not stripped from her when they cast her out with her exile papers, and her grief, and her barely showing belly. Because to strip a widow of her bride price was to invite the old gods to take the pack's luck in exchange. She held it up between 2 fingers. The silver band caught fire in the torchlight. Across the square, the noise died. It moved like a wave, the silence, outward from her, swallowing vendors, and buyers and guards and onlookers, until the whole iron market of Járnvik was holding its breath. "I bid the widow's price of Alex of the Strand line," she said louder now, pitching it to carry to every corner, on the prisoner Halvard Drovik and on the cub in his arms. Both, together, undivided, by sacred law. They did not speak much on the road south. The auctioneer, she would learn his name later, Ormond of the Veldhouse, a soft-faced man with a gold pin, shaped like a hawk clutching a wolf, had taken her bid with the expression of a man swallowing something rotten. He had glanced toward the noble gallery at the square's rear. A tall woman in pearl-gray silk had stood there, long-faced and clever, and very still, and after a moment she had inclined her head the smallest fraction. "Take it. We will recover later." And so Ormond had said through teeth that barely parted, "Sold to the widow. May her dead rest easy." He made it sound like a curse. The Ulfbane cuffs were removed at the base of the platform. The collar they left on, for transit safety, the clerk had said, smiling in a way that did not involve his eyes. He pressed 2 keys into her palm. The smaller one, iron, for the wrist cuffs. The second, heavier and cast in a dark alloy she did not recognize, he held up before surrendering it. "The collar key," he said. "Mind the runes before you use it. They were commissioned custom. Wrong sequence and the seal inverts." She tucked both keys into the front of her dress, where no cutpurse would reach without losing a hand. The collar key she pressed deeper, behind the cuff key, against her ribs. She would need daylight and time before she touched it. The cub she had taken from Halvard's arms herself slowly because his grip had tightened the way a man's grip tightens when he's releasing the last warm thing in his world. The little wolf had cried once, a single high, lost note, and then pressed its damp nose to the wool over Anna's heart and gone immediately, bonelessly, to sleep, as though it had been waiting for somewhere safe to stop. Halvard walked behind her. He did not try to run. He did not ask where she was taking him. Twice she heard him stumble on the uneven road, and twice she heard him catch himself before she could turn. The Ulfbane collar was doing what Ulfbane collars did, wrapping every step in cold iron, making every breath taste of copper and ash. By the time they cleared the last of Járnvik's iron gates and the road bent down into the bracken country, his face in the moonlight was the color of old bone. Anna stopped at the first waystone past the gate. The old marker was carved with a worn-down she-wolf, one paw raised, that the old North Road travelers had rubbed smooth over generations. She turned. Up close, in clean light, without the shame of the platform around him, he was not what she had expected. The songs had drawn him like a war god, fast and certain and terrifying. This man was 35 at the outside, gray already threading his dark hair at the temples, with eyes that had stopped being the color of a river and become something more specific, the gray of forge smoke that has nowhere left to go. He was tall enough that even kneeling on that platform he had been at her eye level. "Sit," she said. He looked at her. "Sit," she said again more gently, "before you fall and break something I cannot fix." He sat. It was not graceful. His body chose its way down in stages, hip to stone, then back to stone, then the back of his head coming to rest against the carved she-wolf. He moved like a man navigating inside a body that no longer quite trusted him. Anna settled the cub into the crook of his arm without asking. It was not a question. The change was immediate. Something in the long line of his shoulders went out, like a knot releasing. His cheek dropped to the silver fur. He closed his eyes. "You absolute fool," Anna told herself, with the weary affection she reserved for her own worst impulses. "You have no idea what you've done." She knelt, with the graceless care of the very pregnant, and drew the smaller iron key from her dress. "The cuffs first," she said. "The collar I want to look at by daylight in clean light, before I attempt the rune sequence. The clerk said they were commissioned custom. I won't risk it in the dark." "You know collar work?" His voice was rough from disuse, rougher still from grief. But it was not what she'd expected. Not the battlefield-carrying boom of the songs, but something quieter, with gravel in it. "I know enough to be careful," she said. "Do you have a name?" A pause. "Halvard." "I know your title. I asked your name." Longer pause. And then, as though it surprised him to be asked, "Halvard is enough." She turned the iron key. The cuffs opened with a sound like a branch cracking in winter. A small clean snap. He flexed his fingers slowly, as though relearning that they belonged to him. "The cub," she said. "His name is Ulf." He did not look up. "My sister's son. He is 4. He has not spoken since—" He stopped. "Since the night they came." Anna's hands stilled on the empty cuffs. 4 winters. She looked at the cub lying against his forearm. The size of a half-grown cat. A 4-year-old wolf child should have been shifting freely by now, gangly and noisy and impossible to keep still. This one was locked into fur and silence by something that had reached down inside him and squeezed every human word out. "He will speak again," she said. She said it the way she said things when she was not entirely certain they were true, quietly, and without looking away. He did look at her then. That gray smoke gaze, flat as water in a bowl. "Thank you," he said. "Not like a king. Like a man." The mill house was not, strictly speaking, a home. 3 stone walls remained of the original building, the 4th having given way to ivy in time. The roof was slate, patchy, with 2 places she had stuffed with wool against the wind. There was a hearth in the western corner that smoked badly when the wind ran north, and a single shutterless window she kept packed with bracken, and a pallet in the corner with a quilt that had been her grandmother's, the one thing she'd saved from the Strand longhouse before the exile. She had dried herbs strung from the rafters, yarrow and elder and fireweed, and one precious bundle of the gray-green moss from the high fells that the healers called Wolf's Cradle and used for fever. It was not a den, but the door barred and the fire drew, and no one had found her here in 3 months. That was enough. She lit the fire, set water to boil, cut bread. The last of yesterday's, because she had spent today's bread money on a king, which was perhaps the least sensible thing she had done in a year of increasingly unsensible decisions. Halvard sat on the floor near the fire, because the single stool looked rickety, and he was a sensible man. He kept Ulf on his knee. He watched her move with the still measuring quiet of someone who is cataloging the room. Exits, weapons, the weight of the door. "Eat," she said, and pushed bread and a wedge of hard cheese toward him. He looked at the food, then at her. "You first." "I'm 8 months gone with child," she said with the dry patience of a woman who has had this exact argument with herself for weeks. "I eat constantly and am still always hungry. Eat." Something moved at the unscarred corner of his mouth. Not a smile. The ghost of a place where a smile used to live, recalled briefly, and then let go. He ate. She warmed yarrow tea and pushed a clay cup toward him. He drank that too. Color came back into his face by slow degrees, the way color comes back into wood drying by the fire, gradually, from the inside out. Ulf would not eat bread. She tried milk warmed on the hearthstone, offered in a clay dish she tilted to the floor. The cub sniffed it once, twice, then began to lap, tentative and then not tentative at all, with the focused, unself-conscious hunger of an animal that has forgotten, temporarily, to be afraid. Halvard watched this without expression. But his hand, curled loose on his knee, had relaxed. The knuckles were no longer white. Later, when the fire had burned to coals, and Anna had settled onto the pallet with the quilt drawn up, and the ache in her lower back going from sharp to merely persistent, she heard him begin to speak. Low. Even. Almost too quiet to catch above the fire. He was telling the cub a story. A wolf child who got lost in a blizzard and found a stranger's fire. An old story. One she had heard in 3 different versions growing up, and recognized now by its bones even through the low, careful way he said it, adjusting the phrasing when Ulf's ears flickered, slowing when the small silver body against his chest took a deep breath. He stopped when he realized she was awake. The words cut off cleanly, and he looked at her across the banked coals, and in the red ember light, the hard lines of his face were softer than he probably knew. "I didn't mean to wake you," he said. "You didn't," she said. It was a lie they both allowed. She pushed herself up slowly, the belly requiring its own negotiation, and pulled the quilt around her shoulders and came to sit on the other side of the hearth. They did not speak for a while. The fire breathed between them. Ulf snuffled and resettled, and Halvard's scarred hand moved to span the width of the small silver back, absently, completely, with a tenderness that did not fit the rest of him, and therefore fit him entirely. She watched that hand and thought, the songs say this hand killed 9 men at the pass of Skuld in a single afternoon, and it is stroking a sleeping wolf pup. He saw her watching. He did not move the hand. "Ask," he said. "Ask what?" "Whatever you're not asking." She looked at the fire. "Tell me what happened, all of it." He told her. He told her in the same quiet, level voice he used for the story, and he did not flinch from any of it. The fall of the Drovik court, not to a battle, but to a slow poisoning. His elder brother, Ulf's father, who had died of something that crept through 3 months of wine before the end, a death the court physicians had called natural, and which they had not called by any other name before they had, one by one, quietly vanished. The night the Ashfeld Legion came over the eastern wall, guided by someone who knew exactly which gate would be undefended, which corridor ran to the royal nursery. His sister had put the cub in his arms while the corridor burned behind her. He had gotten Ulf out. He had gotten no one else. The cub had shifted that night, dragged across the line by terror, and had not shifted back. "The woman in the pearl-gray silk," Anna said when he had been quiet long enough. "In the gallery. At the auction." "Alice Freyel." His jaw worked. "She was my brother's senior advisor. She had been on the council since I was a boy. She had a gift for being in every room before anyone else arrived." A pause. "I cannot prove it, but I have had 3 years in Ashfeld captivity to think, and I can only find one shape that the pattern fits." Anna was quiet for a moment. The coals ticked. "I know that name," she said. "Not from any court. From the men who came for Alex." She told him about the night of the raid, the Ashfeld colors that had not been Ashfeld orders, the dying lieutenant who had given a name with his last breath. A woman's name. A council rank name. "Vrael," he said. "Vrael." They looked at each other across the fire. "She has been hunting both of us," he said slowly. "And she doesn't know yet," Anna said, "that we have come into the same room." Outside, somewhere in the bracken, a night bird screamed and was silenced. The fire cracked. Anna pressed her palm flat against her belly, and the pup pressed back, warm and certain and alive, and she thought, with a fierceness that surprised her, "Whatever you are that they want, they will not have you. They will not have any of us." Across the coals, Halvard was watching her hand on her belly with an expression she could not entirely read. Something careful in it. Something that was not nothing. That low hum she was learning not to name moved quietly in her chest. She went back to the pallet. He returned to the floor by the fire. Neither of them slept for a while. The first week passed in the pattern of work and silence. The mill house, which had been barely shelter for one, learned how to be a den for three: Anna, Halvard, Ulf, and the unborn pup that Anna had taken to talking to in the quiet parts of the day, the way she had taken to talking to herself in the months since Alex. Halvard did the work that her belly had made difficult or impossible. He hauled water from the stream a quarter-mile down the slope. He split the warped shutter into kindling, and replaced it with a cedar plank he had found in the ruined half of the building. He got on the slate roof and laid stones over the worst of the leaks while she stood below, and told him, from memory, where she had put her pots when it rained. He did all of this with the Ulfbane collar still at his throat. The collar key the clerk had given her was the right tool. She had confirmed that much on the first morning, holding it up in full daylight beside the runework at the collar's face. But the rune sequence was cast in barbed layers, each one dependent on the one beneath it, and reading the order wrong would trigger the inversion the clerk had warned of. She spent the first 3 nights studying it by lamplight, with the patience she usually reserved for difficult herb preparations. Careful observation, slow mapping, a borrowed file to test the metal's thickness at the back seam where the runes ended. What she found gave her a small piece of hope. She could not yet read the full sequence safely. That would take more time. But she could thin the Ulfbane at the collar's rear seam until the worst of its suppression eased. Not enough to let his wolf breathe. Enough to let him sleep without waking gray-faced and sweating in the small hours. He thanked her for it the way he thanked her for everything. A small, grave nod. An unspoken thing behind the eyes. On the 7th night, she was doing the filing work again, the lamp close, his back to her so she could reach the collar's seam. She had found the right angle on the 3rd night, and returned to it each time, but the collar's curve meant she had to steady her work with one hand braced at the back of his neck, her fingers against warm skin and the short cropped hair at his nape. She worked in silence. He was very still under her hand. The kind of stillness that is not absence but attention, a man acutely aware of exactly where another person is touching him and choosing not to move. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "No, tight. A beat. It itches. The metal when it gets warm. I'll be done in a few minutes." She felt the slight shift of his exhale. The lamp threw his shadow long across the stone floor. The collar's metal came thinner under the file, and she could feel the faint vibration of it up through her wrist, almost like a pulse, but not quite. The nape of his neck under her palm was warm in a way that had nothing to do with the fire behind them. She noticed she had stopped filing. She started again. When she finished, she set the file aside and lifted her hand from his neck. He turned, and they were closer than she had managed to account for. Her sitting on the low stool, him on one knee, their faces nearly level. The lamplight caught the silver scar along his jaw. His eyes in close firelight were doing something she had not seen before. The gray was edged with gold, very faint, like the rim of a cloud when sun is behind it. She thought, that is not the color they were at the auction. She thought, don't look at it. She looked at the collar instead and said, with great practicality, it should ease by morning. It already has, he said, quietly. She stood and went to put the file away. She did not look back, because she did not trust what her face was doing. Ulf began to improve by degrees so small they were only visible in retrospect. He drank milk twice a day. He slept in the curve of Halvard's arm at night, and in the hollow of Anna's lap, during the afternoon hours when she sat by the door grinding herbs, and the sun came in at the angle that warmed that particular flagstone. On the 8th day, without warning or preamble, he climbed entirely into her lap and laid his small silver head against the taut curve of her belly. He stayed there for an hour, breathing slowly. Inside her, the pup was still in a way it had not been since the day Anna had walked into Járnvik. Not restless, not turning, just present, listening. She looked up to find Halvard in the doorway with an armload of split cedar. He stood looking at the two of them, the silver cub against her belly, her hand resting on Ulf's flank without thinking. And the expression on his face was one she had no name for. Something in her chest pulled taut. She looked away first. From that day, Ulf slept in the space between them, against her belly when Halvard worked, against Halvard's chest in the evenings, as though the cub was keeping account of where warmth was needed most. It was on the 10th day that her milk brother Eirik arrived. Eirik Bøe, second son of the old Greywater Beta, was a long, sun-roughened young man with perpetually rumpled straw-colored hair and a grin he used the way other men used weapons, deployed quickly and with strategic intent. He had been slipping her supplies once a month since her exile, using the excuse of patrol runs that his pack's elders were too distracted to track carefully. He was not due for another 2 weeks. When she saw him coming up the slope in the mid-afternoon with his roan mare lathered and no grin in sight, she knew. He looked past her into the room, where Halvard was on one knee mending the split leg of the stool, Ulf watching from the hearthstone with the bright liquid attention of a creature deciding whether to flee. Eirik's hand moved to his belt knife. Anna stepped into the doorway. Eirik, Totten. Anna. His voice was careful. That is the Drovek king. He's mine, she said. I bought his freedom. There's a different sort of paper on him now. Eirik's gaze came back to her face, reading it the way he'd always been able to read it since they were children in the same hall. He let the knife hand fall. 3 Ashfeld companies on the southern road. One of them's flying the Vrail colors. They're not looking for him specifically. They're looking for the woman who bought him. Anna. They know it was a widow's bid. They know where to look. The cold moved up from the flagstone through the soles of her feet. How long? She said. 2 days. 3 if the Vrail tracker is being careful. He's a half Ashfeld named Call who can read a trail in running water. They will not be slow for long. Halvard rose behind her without sound. She felt him come to stand at her shoulder, not in front of her, she noted. At her shoulder. His presence at her back changed the shape of the doorway. Eirik looked up at him. A long moment. Then Eirik, who had grown up in a pack with a proper beta and knew exactly what the word grace meant and when to use it, said, Your Grace, I'm sorry the news is poor. I thank you for bringing it, Halvard said. Why did you? Because she's mine. Simply. The same way you seem to be. Anna's throat closed. She had not understood how much she had needed someone from her old life to walk through a door and not flinch until the moment it happened. She gripped Eirik's wrist hard enough to leave a mark. Stay the night, eat, tell me everything, then we plan. They spent the first day preparing. Halvard moved the woodpile to shore up the gap in the ruined wall. Anna mixed 3 batches of the strongest sleep poultice she knew, moss gray and thick, the kind that would put a wolf flat for an hour pressed to the mouth and nose. They cleared the stream path of brush, placed the pallet near the door rather than the back wall. They did not speak much about the thing between them. There was a thing between them. She knew it. She could see it in the way that heat behind her sternum had stopped its low hum, and begun to sing, constant now, like a kettle that has not yet begun to steam but is no longer cold. She could feel it in the particular awareness she had of where he was in a room, the way her body registered his proximity, the way it registered the warmth of the fire, without needing to look, without deciding to. She suspected he felt it too. She suspected this by the way he handed her things now. Cup, file, a piece of wood she needed held, with a fraction more deliberateness than the task required, as though each transfer of something between them was a negotiation neither of them had agreed to put into words. On the second night, with Ulf asleep on the pallet and the fire banked low for morning, Anna was kneeling by the hearth to move the coals. The position was difficult, the belly required careful counterbalancing, and she had her weight shifted awkwardly to one hip. She heard him cross the room. He came up behind her. Not close enough to touch, just close enough that she felt the warmth of him at her back, the particular warmth of a large body that has been near a fire. And then he draped her shawl, her own, which she had left by the door, around her shoulders. He could have handed it to her. He laid it across her shoulders instead, and his hand stayed there, on the curve where her neck met her shoulder. 1 moment. 2. His thumb rested against her collarbone without pressure, simply present, simply warm. She turned her head. He was very close. The ember light turned the silver scar at his jaw to something softer, and his eyes, she had been right, that night by the lamp, something had changed in them, were not fully gray anymore. There was gold at the edges of the iris, faint as a winter dawn, barely there, and impossible to look away from. Anna, he said. It was the first time he had used her name. He said it like a man who had been carrying it carefully for days, afraid to set it down in case it broke on the floor between them. The warmth behind her ribs pulled so taut it almost hurt. She felt the shawl slip off one shoulder. She lifted her face. He bent. The door latch rattled. Both of them went still. The latch rattled again. A small tentative thing, not a fist, more like a paw. And then a soft thump. And then silence. Halvard was already moving. He set her back from the door with one hand, the touch brief, warm, gone, and crossed the room in 3 strides. He lifted the bar. He opened the door one careful hand's width. On the threshold, a marten young, one ear showing an old bite scar, holding a dead mouse in its jaws with enormous pride. It looked up at Halvard with the bright, wet black eyes of a creature presenting a meaningful gift. It set the mouse at his bare foot. It chirped once. It turned and bolted back into the bracken with the dignity of a completed mission. Halvard stood very still for a long moment, looking down at the mouse. Then Anna, laughing despite herself, half amused, half furious at the interruption, came to stand beside him in the doorway. "A gift," she said. "From the wood." "From the wood," he agreed. His voice had gone strange. His shoulders were shaking. She looked at his face and understood. He was not laughing. He was crying, very quietly, in the way she had only ever seen strong men cry. Shoulders moving, face controlled, the tears getting out anyway. She did not ask why. She knew why. A king who had lost everything, a court, a brother, a sister, a name, was being brought a mouse on his doorstep by a marten because the small wild things of the bracken had decided, by whatever calculus wild things use, that he belonged here. She reached out and put her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, hard enough to bruise. She let him. They stood in the doorway until the east sky went from black to the first gray suggestion of morning, and the fire behind them breathed low, and Ulf made small sleeping sounds from the pallet, and the almost kiss hung between them like a word not yet spoken, patient as the snow that had not yet come. Alice Frail's company came on the morning of the 3rd day, while the dew was still silver on the bracken. Anna saw them first. She had gone out to the woodpile and looked up by accident, and there they were. 11 riders on the ridge above, the pearl gray banner snapping in the wind that smelled of rain coming from the east. The breath left her completely. Then, Halvard. He was at the door before the second syllable landed. He looked at the ridge. He looked at her. Inside, he said. One word. She went. Ulf went flat on the pallet, ears pinned. Halvard barred the door and crossed to the rafters where he had, over the past week, quietly lashed a length of hardwood into the thatch above the hearth. He pulled it down, not a sword, not even close, but hardwood and balanced, and his hand closed around it with the ease of a man who has held worse and done more. She watched him test the weight of it and understood, for the first time with complete clarity, that she was looking at a man who had protected his people, and would do so again without hesitation and without shame. The Ulfbane collar sat at his throat. His wolf was still locked in. He would do this as a man. Open the door, he said quietly. Stand in the threshold. Let them think they are talking to a frightened pregnant woman alone. I will be behind it. She held his gaze for one breath. Then she nodded. She took 3 slow breaths. She pulled her shawl up over her hair. She unbarred the door, and she stepped out onto the worn flagstone with her hands open and visible, and her heart very loud in her ears, and her face completely calm. The riders were coming down the slope. At their head rode a narrow man in pearl gray, his face all efficiency and contempt. Beside him on a small dun horse was a wiry man in undyed leather with eyes the color of ice over deep water. That one she marked immediately, the tracker, Call, whose name Eric had given her. The eyes moved over the mill house, over the door, over the smoke from the chimney, over her belly with a fraction too long pause that told her he already knew. 8 soldiers behind them. And at the back, hood still up, a single rider whose posture changed the character of everyone near it. The captain dismounted at the edge of her berry plot. Halt and be seen. By order of House Freyel and the Ashfeld Crown. Anna inclined her head. The captain produced a scroll. He read it at her with the mechanical confidence of a man who has never had a scroll read back to him. Anna Strand, exiled widow, squatting contested land in unlawful possession of crown property. I bought him in open market, she said. By widow's right, with sacred coin, witnessed and accepted by your own auctioneer. There is no unlawful possession. The captain's mouth thinned. Widow's right is under formal review. Pending that review, you will surrender. The cloaked rider at the back of the column pushed back her hood. Every horse went quiet. Alice Freyel in daylight was less carved and more clever than she had appeared across the auction square. Long-faced and pale, with eyes the color of slate after rain, and a smile that was warm and terrible and entirely deliberate. Child, she said. Her voice was the voice of a healer, a grandmother, a trusted elder. There has been a misunderstanding. My captain is too blunt. We have not come for the prisoner. Her gray eyes found Anna's belly with the directness of a woman looking at exactly what she had come for. We have come for you. Anna's hand moved without permission to the curve of her belly. Alice's smile widened a fraction. You carry a very rare thing. Did you know? The Strand line was believed extinct on the female side, but here you are, half-blood and exiled and carrying a child that hums with a gift the world has not seen in 100 years. We have been searching for you for a very long time, Anna. We didn't know it was you, specifically. We knew there was a woodline somewhere on the border. And we knew that... A pause, precise as a knife point. So we watched. So we raided. So we removed any mate who might have anchored you to a pack that could protect you. The world went white at its edges. Alex, Anna said. The young Strand, Beta. Alice's smile did not falter. He fought very well. From behind the door, Anna heard the smallest sound. A breath, a grip tightening on a cedar club. She prayed Halvard would wait. Alice had not mentioned a king. Alice did not know. "Come willingly," Alice said, and her tone was that of a woman offering a kindness, "and we will deliver your child safely. We will even leave the runt cub and the chained man inside that house alive. You may keep them as pets in the comfortable rooms we will provide. Refuse." The smile did not change at all. "And we take you anyway, and the child will be removed from you the moment it is born, and the cub and the man will answer for it before you finish screaming." Anna looked at the captain, at the 8 soldiers, at Cole the tracker, whose ice-pale eyes had not left her face. She looked at Alice Frail. She thought of Alex walking into the dark with a torch in his hand and not coming back. She thought of Ulf on her belly, breathing in time with the pup inside her. She thought of a marten dropping a dead mouse at a broken king's foot in the grey pre-dawn, and of a hand closing around hers hard enough to bruise, and of a name said like something precious being set down carefully. The heat behind her ribs was not singing anymore. It was blazing. She smiled. She did not know she could, until she did. "I refuse," she said. Alice sighed, the particular sigh of a woman whose patience has a bottom, and they have reached it. "Take her." The captain stepped forward. The millhouse door came off its upper hinge. Halvard came through it. He moved with a speed that had no right to exist in a man wearing an Ulfbane collar, carrying a length of hardwood that was emphatically not a sword. The captain's hand was still on his sword hilt when the blow took him across the temple. He dropped. The horses screamed. A crossbow loosed. The bolt caught Halvard in the thigh. He did not make a sound. He pulled the shaft free in stride, and the soldier who had loosed it did not have time to loose another. 2 more soldiers closed on him. Cole was already off his horse, a thin blade drawn, circling away from the main fight toward Anna. She backed against the door frame. Her hands were on her belly. She had no weapon. She had no wolf. She had 3 months of loneliness and grief, and the steady bone-deep knowledge that she would not give this woman what she had come for. Cole lunged. The world went silver. No sound. No warning. No heat. It came out of her on a single sharp exhale, all of it at once, everything that had been gathering in her chest, since the moment she had looked up at a kneeling man in a market square, and felt something ring in the dark behind her ribs. It was not metaphor. It was not instinct. It was a fire that had been waiting behind her sternum for 26 years, waiting for exactly this, the moment she stopped being afraid of it. It came out as light. Pale silver, clean, radiating outward, in a wave that moved through the courtyard, the way a held breath moves through a room, slow, total, touching everything. It touched Cole's blade, and the blade became silver dust in his fist. It touched the 2 soldiers on Halvard, and they staggered backward, not bleeding, not burned, only stricken, clutching at their faces with their hands held up, as though warding off a memory they could not name, and they sat down heavily on the grass and stayed there, breathing hard, causing no more trouble. It touched the Ulfbane collar at Halvard's throat. The silver fire knew runes the way living things know their own language. It did not unlock the seal. It unmade it. The runes flared black for one instant, like a word being erased, and then crumbled. The collar fell in 2 pieces, ringing on the flagstone, and lay there, and was just metal. The light touched, last of all, the pearl-grey rider at the back of the column. Alice Frail's horse reared. Alice did not flinch. The cleverness had gone from her face and left something rawer, not fear. Hunger, dut. The naked, unveiled hunger of a woman who has spent years searching for a thing, and has finally found it. "There you are," she breathed. And then Halvard threw back his head. The sound that came out of him was not a man's sound. It was the 10 years caged version of both man and wolf, the howl of something that had been waiting a very long time to be let out. On the second note, the air around him broke, and the wolf came through. He was enormous. Wet slate gray, silver at the muzzle, the size of a yearling bear. His eyes, when they swung to fix on Alice, were the color of a winter river breaking open into gold. He moved. Alice's horse bolted. 3 soldiers broke after it. Call ran for the bracken. The wolf let them go and went instead for Alice, who had been thrown at the slope's edge when her horse fled and had come up with something small and dark in her hand. A vial. Glass. Its contents bright and oily. Wolfband distilled. Concentrated. Enough to cut a true bond in a single dose. She flung it at the wolf's open mouth. The vial spun in the morning air. Anna, still on the threshold, still blazing at the edges, lifted her hand. The last threads of the silver light caught the vial mid-arc, wrapped it, turned its path in a slow, inevitable curve, back the way it had come. It broke on Alice Frail's own upturned face. She made a small, soft, almost wondering sound. Then she sank to her knees, and then to the ground, and the pearl-gray silk pooled around her, and her clever eyes closed, and she was still. The silver fire in Anna guttered. Her knees buckled. She sat down hard on the flagstone with her back against the ruined doorframe, and the world tilted at the corners, and the last thing she saw before it went dark was the great gray wolf turning from where Alice Frail lay, and crossing the yard in 3 bounding strides to lay his massive head very gently against her belly. She woke to lamplight and yarrow smoke, and a small warm weight tucked under her chin. Ulf had wedged himself into the hollow of her throat, his silver muzzle pressed to her collarbone, his ears moving with each breath she took, as though he had appointed himself her heartbeat monitor and was taking the position seriously. Beyond the cub, sitting on the floor with his back against the bed frame and one hand resting on the curve of her belly, was Halvard. He was a man again. He wore one of Eric's spare shirts, which was too narrow across the shoulders, and would never forgive either of them for it. The scar at his jaw was joined now by a new one across his thigh, pink and closed, already past the worst, and there was a bruise the color of a winter storm along his left cheekbone. The Ulfbane collar was gone, both pieces of it. He looked, despite everything, like a man who had slept for the first time in years. When her eyes opened, he did not startle. He only looked at her and said, very softly, "You came back." "How long?" 2 days. A pause. "The fire took everything you had. He stopped. Did not finish. Did not need to." "The pup?" she said with the sharp clawing fear that preceded the question. "Is alive and turning," he said immediately. "Here. Hair." He took her hand and pressed it over his, already resting on her belly, and after a moment a small foot pushed up into both their palms, firm and insistent and entirely unconcerned with anyone's drama. Anna closed her eyes. The tears came without her permission. She felt Halvard's thumb move across her cheek, carefully, brushing one away. "Alice," she said. "Gone. Her own poison." He gave her the account quietly. The captain, 2 soldiers, the rest fled. "Call the tracker. Gone and unlikely to return alone. The pearl-gray banner has fallen, Anna. The Ashveld crown will have to decide what to do about all of this, and that will take time. We have time." She opened her eyes. He was close. The lamplight on him was different now, warmer, she thought, than it had been before. Or perhaps the gray in his eyes had genuinely changed. There was gold in them, clear and settled, where the river silver had been. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what?" "For bringing this." "You brought nothing." His voice was quiet, but not gentle. It was something past gentleness, something stripped down to its truth. They brought it. They built it over years. You. He paused. "You ended it. The fire is yours. It has been yours since before you were born. There is nothing in it to be sorry for. She thought of a dozen questions she should ask. She asked none of them. Your leg, she said instead. The unscarred corner of his mouth moved. The wolf healed it when he came through. There will be a scar. I have a great many. One more is not a tragedy. Between them, Wolf stirred. He lifted his small silver head. He looked at Anna. He looked at Halvard. And then, in a voice that scraped with the rust of 2 months' silence, in a voice no one in the world had heard since the night his mother had put him in his uncle's arms, he said one word. Hungry. Both of them went completely still. Ulf? Halvard said. The cub looked at him with the patient, slightly impatient expression of a 4-year-old who has said a very clear thing and is waiting for the adults to act on it. Hungry, he said again. And then, with enormous effort, like a child, remembering a courtesy that seems unnecessary under the circumstances. Please. Anna laughed. It came out wet and helpless and utterly undignified, tears still on her cheeks. Halvard made a sound in his throat that was not laughter, and was not weeping, and was somehow better than either, and he scooped the cub up in both hands, and held him against his chest, pressed his mouth to the soft silver fur of the small skull, and said in a voice that had gone entirely to pieces, All right, little king, all right, whatever you want, anything in the world. He looked at Anna over the cub's head. The gold in his eyes was very clear now. The river had broken open entirely, and there was sun in it. Anything in the world, he said again, and he was no longer speaking to Ulf. She held out her hand. He took it. He brought it to his mouth and pressed his lips to her knuckles, slowly, deliberately, the way a man takes a vow he intends to keep. Then he stood and carried the cub to the hearth, and warmed milk himself, because she was still too unsteady to stand, and because he had decided, without saying so, that this was now his fire to tend. Anna lay watching him in the lamplight. The heat behind her ribs was quiet now. Not gone. Not silent. Settled. It, like a lamp turned low for the night, still burning, no longer needed to flare. She put her hand on her belly and said, in the silent way she had learned to talk to the pup inside her, We are all right, little one. We are all right. The pup, who would be born 6 weeks later, under a hunter's moon, and named Fridays, with Alex as her second name for the father she would never meet, kicked once, warm and agreeable, and went back to sleep. In the weeks that followed, the mill house became slowly, and without anyone naming it, a den. Eirik came back with 3 Greywater pack youngsters who had decided, on their own authority, that exile laws casting out pregnant widows were laws that deserved to be disagreed with. They brought a wagon load of timber and a goat in milk, and a formal, slightly embarrassed message from the Greywater elders, indicating that the matter of Anna's exile was under active reconsideration. Ulf began shifting. Not fully, not yet, but in brief, tentative bursts, a boy's hand emerging from the silver paw and then retreating, like a creature testing a threshold it had been taught was dangerous. By the 6th week, he was shifting for an hour at a time, a solemn, dark-haired child of 4, with gray eyes and a perpetual look of deep consideration, who spoke in short, clear sentences and had an unnerving habit of stating things at their exact, precise value. He called Anna warm. He called Halvard mine. He called the pup in Anna's belly sister, and when she asked how he knew, he looked at her with the patient certainty of someone who does not understand why the question is being asked. Halvard repaired the mill house wall by wall, timber by timber, with the methodical focus of a man who has decided that what he is building matters. Anna watched him from the door in the early mornings and understood that he was not building a shelter. He was building a home. There was a difference, and he knew it, and she knew that he knew, and neither of them had yet said the full shape of what was happening between them. They were close to it constantly, in the way his hands found reasons to be near hers, passing her a cup, checking her temperature when she ran a fever in the 4th week, lifting her feet onto his knee without asking on the evenings when her ankles swelled. In the way she had begun to fall asleep by the fire, and wake to find a blanket she had not put there arranged around her shoulders, and the room slightly warmer than it had been, and Halvard at the hearth with his back to her, giving her the privacy of coming back to herself before he turned around. He was still not a man who said sweet things. He was, increasingly, a man whose actions had learned a language she was becoming fluent in. On the 40th night, she woke in the small hours to find him awake beside her. They had been sharing the wider pallet for a week, for warmth, by practical agreement that neither of them examined too closely, and he was watching the ceiling, jaw set, thinking. "What is it?" she said. A pause. "Emissaries have come from 3 of the old Járnvik vassal villages. They want to know if their king means to come home." Anna was quiet for a moment. "What did you tell them?" "Not yet." He turned his head. The gold in his eyes in the darkness was very clear. "I have a child to raise and a pup not yet born to meet. And," a pause that had weight in it, "and something I have not yet finished." She looked at him. "You are already finished," she said. "With whatever you think you haven't finished. You are already." She did not have the exact word in any language that fit. She said more quietly, "You are already home." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached up and, very carefully, tucked a strand of hair back from her face. His thumb brushed her temple. Stayed there a beat too long. "Anna of Greywater," he said. "Anna of the mill house," she corrected. "Anna of the mill house," he agreed. Something in his voice had been there for weeks and had finally found permission to exist, something warm in a way that had nothing to do with the fire. He bent. This time, no latch rattled. He kissed her with the careful deliberateness of a man who has been patient for a very long time and intends to be patient no longer. She kissed him back with the decisive clarity of a woman who has been making impossible bids in impossible markets for months and is quite comfortable with the terms. Outside, in the bracken, something small and nocturnal made a satisfied sound and moved on. The pup came in the 2nd week of the hunter's moon. The labor was long, and Anna swore at length in 2 languages, mostly at Halvard, who absorbed it with the equanimity of a man who has decided that this is exactly where he is meant to be. He did not let go of her hand once. He spoke low and steady and told her, when she asked, that she was the bravest person he had ever met, and when she told him that was useless information right now, he agreed, and said it again anyway. Eirik's eldest sister, a midwife of great patience and greater competence, caught the child. It was a girl. She had a thatch of dark hair and eyes that in the lamplight shifted between gray and gold the way her father's did when he was feeling something too large for one color. When the midwife laid her on Anna's chest, she opened her small mouth and let out one pure, ringing cry, and every wolf in a mile's radius lifted its head. They named her Freydís Anna Strand. Halvard spoke the name clearly for the midwife's record. Strand first, for the woman who had carried her. Drovek second, for the house that would claim her. He said it without hesitation, the way he said things he had decided on. When Ulf was permitted into the room, he had been pacing outside for 3 hours, which was 4-year-old, for extremely concerned. He climbed onto the pallet and laid his silver muzzle along the baby's bare foot, with great seriousness. The baby, approximately 4 minutes old, kicked him in the nose. He sneezed. He looked deeply betrayed. Everyone in the room laughed, and Anna laughed, which she had not believed she had left in her after the preceding hours. Halvard, sitting on the edge of the pallet with his arm around Anna's shoulders and one hand cupped over the dark down on his daughter's head, did not laugh. He was very quietly undone, the way she had seen him undone by a Martin's gift in the pre-dawn. Shoulders moving, face mostly still, the tears getting out anyway. She reached up and pressed her thumb to the unscarred corner of his mouth. Stop. You'll set me off. He turned his face into her palm. He pressed his lips to her wrist, slowly. Against her skin he said, "Marry me, Anna of the Mill House." She had not known she had been waiting for it until the moment it arrived. She said yes. They were bonded at midsummer under the great ash tree at the clearing's edge, with Freydis in a sling against Anna's chest, and Ulf, now shifting freely for whole days at a time, a solemn 4-year-old with silver-gray eyes and a smudge on his chin that no one had been able to satisfactorily locate the source of, standing as their witness beside Eric, and a delegation of Greywater elders who had arrived with their formal apology and Halvard set his teeth at the curve of Anna's shoulder and broke the skin in the small, precise mark of the mating bite, and the warmth that had hummed and blazed and settled and sung in her chest since the evening in the iron market of Járnvik bloomed, full and certain, into a warm cord that ran between them like light through amber. She felt his joy in it, and at the edges grief, the long patient backlog of his losses, the names of his dead, the shape of a sister's arms, releasing a small silver cub into his. She gave him hers in return. Alex, going into the dark with a torch. Her grandmother's quilt. The pup she had talked to in the dark for months before it could answer. They held each other's losses for a moment in the new bond, and by mutual silent agreement, set them down. The cord remained. It was warm. The morning after, Anna woke before the sun. Halvard was still asleep beside her, one heavy arm across her waist, his face slack and unguarded in the way she only ever saw when he slept, and could not help it. Freydis breathed the soft regular breath of a healthy infant in the cradle Eric had carved. Ulf, in his boy's shape, was curled at the foot of the pallet with one fist in the quilt. She slid out from under the arm, careful and practiced, and went to the door and lifted the bar and stepped barefoot onto the flagstone, where 9 months ago she had stood with her hands open and spent her last silver on a stranger's freedom. The grass was silver with dew. The sky to the east was just beginning to go pink at the rim. She stood with her hand at her side, her belly empty of everything but herself for the first time in a year, and she thought about the woman who had walked into the iron market of Járnvik on her last coin, head down, wanting nothing. You didn't know, she thought. You didn't know any of it. She heard small bare feet behind her. A small warm hand slipped into hers. Ulf, sleep-rumpled and deeply serious, leaned against her hip and looked out at the pink east with her. Is it morning? He said. It is, she said. Good, he said. I am hungry. She laughed. She bent, easily now, her body her own again, and scooped him up and settled him on her hip. And she carried him back into the warm den where her king and her daughter slept. And she shut the door behind them. If you've come this far with me, dear listener, I would love to know what caught you hardest. The auction? The silver fire? The marten and its mouse? Or the small voice asking, hungry? You want more stories like this one, of broken kings and quiet women, and the strange wild mercy of the north, stay with me. There are a great many more nights like Anna's where this one came from. And I would be honored to tell them to you.